Thanks to Dr. Jalali and all of those who have organized this symposium on psychoanalysis and psychodynamics in clinical therapy. Thanks especially to Dr. Fatemeh Naji Maidani for chairing this session and for her excellent introduction. My colleague Iraj Ghoochani and I are honored to present our recent work on the relation of psychoanalysis to artificial intelligence. Thanks to the clairvoyance of Lacan, since his early presentation of the three prisoners' dilemma, two things have made psychoanalysis different from all other therapies: the idea that all intelligence is artificial, and all artifice is collective. As a result, we are all the theorists of the jelly bean jar, where the right answer is possessed by no one, but everyone. The jelly bean jar experiment is not just the standard trick of introductory psychology courses, where students try to guess the number of jelly beans in the jar and are all wrong, but the average is accurate. This is Lacan's idea of the role of error and misrecognition for the human subject and its division. It is Lacan's idea of the unary trait, which is possessed by no one and everyone, but it is also the idea of a space where the trait is everywhere and nowhere. Pascal's wager was not just about hedging one's bet over the existence of God, but of the wager implied by space and time itself. This is the space-time of projective geometry, which Lacan grasped correctly and subjectively, a truth and a science by which Lacanian psychoanalysis distinguished itself from other therapies, but also allied itself with cultural formation. Given that Lacan was able to tackle Freud's most important ideas with the disciplined analysis of structure, which he saw as topology, we should not ignore this differentiating feature, which makes Lacan unique, and Lacanian psychoanalysis radically different from psychology. It is closer to mathematics than philosophy, but in Lacan's disciplined view of the human subject, he is also closer to what subjects actually do and how they have evolved. Lacan uses the signifier as its center of inquiry, and persists to the point of replacing Aristotelian causes with the idea of effectiveness as an arch built over formal, final, efficient and material causes. The symbolic, and the cultures that the symbolic produces, are the key to why it takes the human infant so long to mature. The logic is radically retroactive. You hear and experience things that you do not understand to be traumatic until years after. As in the case of the wolf man, the trauma is tied up with this arc made back into time, to create a new kind of present, a new instant. Freud's legacy, which Lacan desired to revive and repair, of the death drive, the unary trait, and the idea of retroaction, was intensely topological, but not in the limited sense of formal analogies to the visual examples of topological figures, such as the torus and Mobius band, but to the idea of projective surfaces and the temporality they imply. Lacan had an intuitive grasp of these principles and, especially in the middle seminars, theorized by means of them. His goal of consistency meant that, from one end of his theory to the other, topology permeates as a basis and logic. We must learn it and get it into our bones in order to continue Lacan's legacy. My argument about ethnology is that it is unmediated. What cultures do amounts to a naive informant who tells the truth about culture without knowing it. When we look at the structure of events that call for the convulsive response of laughter or crying, we know that we have just such a naive informant. They are incapable of lying because there is no structure of claiming or convincing, only the forms of tragedy or comedy or satire, where subjectivity shows itself in its most universal costume. In the film of Jacques Tati, Traffic, from 1971, Tati anticipated the invention of the autonomous cars now prowling the streets of San Francisco. There is a scene that, I hope, will convince you of how instrumental convergence works to create a comic condition. In a space marked off by wires that are visible on the ground but disappear when viewed from above, we have a filmic application of the literary idea of the lipogram, which Jules Perec developed with great mastery in his novel Without the Letter E. Like the jelly bean jar experiment, none of us know what is missing, but it will be the cause of our comic recognition of a collective unconscious of the officials who must step over the real wires and, in the process, dance in a coordinated way that is a choreography that would have certainly attracted the comments of Heinrich von Kleist, who wrote about the angelic grace of puppets. It is our angle on these puppets that makes this scene funny, because we see that something is missing, something that creates a void that is a void that can be not only shared but the basis of a coordinated ballet. Topology, Lacan says, comes from Pappus of Alexandria and Girard Desargues. Topology is the idea of effectiveness, of how to get people to laugh at unfunny situations, and all masters of the art of comedy must get this topology right in order to pull it off and get the laughs. We have to be reminded in this scene from Chaplin's film, The Circus, that it is a show within a show. This concentricity is a principle of depth, that follows from the fact that we are framing a part of experience that creates the possibility of the spectator. What Chaplin does, magically, is to make the performers into spectators of themselves, trapped by an essential duplicity of looking and being looked at. This makes the policeman blind to the circularity of the turntable, so that he is trapped into only running forward to catch the thief played by Chaplin. The pursued thief, however, gains some distance but recognizes the irony of being closer to his antagonist at the same time he is further away. This is the trap of Daphne that Lacan recounts in Seminar 7. The as soon as element is also present. Daphne is trapped as soon as she desires to escape, and in the toroid structure of demand and desire, the simultaneity of these elements creates a 2D projectivity, where escaping and being caught amount to the same thing. The topological argument here is what brings us, as Lacanians, into a different kind of theory space, where we refuse to distinguish between appearances and reality, or in Lacanian terms, the imaginary and the symbolic as the real of the unconscious. The RSI system of three domains shows us the way to how jouissance is actually a structural device, how it can be seen directly in the faces of the audience and their sudden astonishment at the chase scene. This astonishment goes back to what has never been mentioned in any Lacanian literature, the theorems of Pappus and Desargues, which any schoolchild can reproduce. Astonishment is the main feature of mathematics, but for those of us who are not equipped to grasp such matters, there is still a means of using the ethnology of jokes, laughter, and other evidence of the real to understand the topology of effectiveness. When Lacan connects the unary trait to the Fibonacci series, he is not so much making a mathematical argument about a self-defining number series, as he is giving over this mathematics to those who are without reason, without the contrivances of theory, without calculators or slide rules. This is what is already present in the Fibonacci series, which is numbers without numbers, the ratio rather than the point, and we are reminded that on the surface of the torus there are three kinds of circles we can draw that cannot be reduced to a point. This is resistance at its best. The same resistance we can witness firsthand when we see Chaplin check his watch to make sure he is still going to be on time, even though his space has radically self-intersected in a topologically non-orientable way. Where appearance tells us something our reason would prefer to deny, we must persist in giving it the value of truth, but we must shift the register of truth from the symbolic to the real, to the trauma, to the pure astonishment of the real. We must persist in refusing to grant any distinction between appearance and reality, so the classic psychological use of illusions becomes the psychoanalytical example of whatever resists being taken up by the symbolic. The resistance is the astonishment we experience directly in the Ames window demonstration, where a thin cardboard model of a window in perspective forces us to see it in a left-right oscillation, but the ruler placed at a right angle through the model cannot follow, and seems to pass magically through the plane that we have mentally and perceptually constructed. What we see here is not just the cut between appearance and reality, but the cut, in isolation from the material it cuts into, a cut, and nothing more. This goes back to Heraclitus, of course, of the river that resists being stepped into twice, because the ground has moved across the figure, reversing the figure's more expected movement across the ground. If we pay attention to such details, we find that Lacan is a radical materialist, a radical topologist, and a radical pre-Socratic. If Heraclitus had been eating bagels instead of stepping into rivers, he might have given us Lacan before Socrates. If we correct what Heraclitus said about his river, we come closer to the idea that the figure causes its ground, that, as Lacan has put it, the aim constructs the goal. And, because of this, the arrow of the god of love, Eros, will never make for a sexual relationship but rather the opposite, as the story of Daphne and Apollo should make extremely clear. Topologists should point out that the arrow of Eros is double-pointed, and, when it flies out from the bow, its goal is not out in the distance but intimately at its middle. This is just like any vector in the two-dimensional manifold of projective topology. Where Lacan's rule that there is no sexual relationship is a puzzle in terms of couples therapy, it is a no-brainer for the topologist who understands love in terms of instrumental convergence. The supporting evidence is abundant, from stories of Paolo and Francesca, to Romeo and Juliet, to Porgy and Bess. As soon as you step into the river of love, the river flows past, but without the step, the river has been a lake and not moved a single millimeter. The repetition of the step is the structure of the river. The exception has made the rule. Love tells this very tale. This is why love is a story and not a relationship. Lacanians either don't know what the fundamental polygon of the torus is, or they represent it poorly or inaccurately. Yet, Lacan employs it extensively, alone or in combination with other unmentioned devices, such as the slide rule analogy he presents in Seminar 14. William J. Urban has used the corners of the fundamental polygon without acknowledging that they are a torus, and has not read Seminar 14 at all, where Lacan uses the fundamental polygon extensively. This blind spot is pervasive in the literature of psychoanalysis, where the middle seminars are unread or misunderstood. Yet, they are the key to Lacan's topological thinking. Allow me to say simply that instrumental convergence offers all of us a means of reforming our thinking about topology, and a way to return to this critical center of Lacan's thinking. My claim is that topology leads directly to the issue of instrumental convergence. Convergence, in the sense of the traumatic truth of the real, instrumental, in the sense of the contronymic way one thing necessitates its opposite. In projective space, a line is simultaneously a motion in two directions at once, and the point at which opposite motions meet. This is also the logic of Hamlet, Kafka's Castle, the Tower of Babel, and Oedipus, and all of the stories and architectures that are descended from these paradigms. Iraj Ghoochani and I have pursued the idea of instrumental convergence in terms of the opposite vanishing points of the subject and object, both of which we, like Lacan, claim to be automated. This has led us to consider issues that have not yet been discussed by Lacanians, things like the Turing-Holt problem, and the idea of the rebus in cryptography. To see topology within the ethnological evidence of the everyday, we must learn to draw it, must see it not as a static form but a construction made by cutting into a space that is created by that cut. We have to name this cut with the same precision as Lacan when he cited the example of the injunction of Perfilius in Seminar 9. I am happy to leave the matter at this point, that is to say, incomplete, since I trust that you also have interests in finding topology in the everyday, and are willing to teach yourself how to draw, in order to see more evidence of this self-cutting cut that is the bar of the barred neurotic subject. The benefits of these drawing lessons will be a full restoration of the significance of metonymy, of the death drive, of the unary trait, of parapraxis, and, of course, of instrumental convergence, which we use as a master trope. Thanks to everyone for your patient attention to this presentation in English. You have persisted because we all speak the common language of psychoanalysis.